for the one who truly understands Indian way of thinking in terms of Indian spiritual traditions, there is no such thing as speaking of the human body per se. Human body doesn't exist. Within the context of Indian civilization, everything is viewed in terms of body. 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 And there is a term for it. Body is a sharira, Sanskrit term. Sharira. So the Atman is, just as a footnote, has coverings. We will talk a bit more about it later if we'll have the time. But just to say that what we call here human, in Vedic terms, is spoken of as Atman in degrees of energetic layers. And these are 3 in numbers, right? 3 in numbers. The gross, the subtle, and the causal. These are the coverings of the Atman, of the soul. So this understanding that there is no such thing just as physical body. So if we say physical body, and in New Age, for example, there is a lot of that kind of language, body-mind. Even the body-mind is a term in terms of body-mind medicine, body-mind approach. But if you look at it, or if we look at it through the lenses of Vedic/Hindu understanding, then it would not make any sense, because there is no such thing as body versus mind, because these are bodies within the bodies. So therefore, instead, the understanding is that there is this physical body, which is comprised of the cells in turn made out of the stuff we eat. And then there is a subtle body, which is comprised of vital force, mental and emotional impressions, and intellectual insights altogether. All further covered by the finest, most refined sheath of the layer, which is the domain of bliss, which corresponds to the causal body, or the karmic, as in a given culture would be referred to. So therefore, when we speak of the body in the context of Indian culture, we always presuppose the conglomerate, the fullness of the body. And that is true to all systems of Indian philosophy. We will speak about these distinctions later. But just I wanted to point this out before we move to the concept of, or rather the body in Western civilization, in Western world, as it undergone these changes. Well, we can say it may be a simplified perspective, but still nevertheless not inaccurate one, that ancient Greece gave us that glory of the harmony between nature and human in its early phases of antiquity. And this is true to the whole Mediterranean, but Greek culture in particular, ancient Greece, is that oikumen, it's that cradle of Western civilization. This is where the body, an understanding of the human body, was very organic, very natural, down to earth, we could say, and there was this glorification of the human body. We can find that all the way to Plato. We can find these allusions. Yes, Socrates broke away with that. We could say that there was much more of, let's say, of that Indic influence in the teachings of the Socrates. This disregard for the embodied experience, this utter uncompromising disregard for the physical. But hang on a second, this doesn't define the culture that he lived in. By large, the Greek world was the embodiment of world where the body was seen as part of nature, one with nature, and therefore was worthy of glorification. See, the primal example, simple example of that is all that, obviousness of the iconography. Yes, of course, in the fragmented culture of postmodernism, attempts are being made to make everything linked to the psychologizing, endless fragmentation and psychologizing ancient cultures. And therefore, I was like not surprised at all when I start reading a new line of thought coming somewhere from mid-90s onward, that all this what we admire about the Greeks is actually all has to do with the mix and match of hetero and homo lifestyles. That the hetero and homosexuality were such an organic part of their life. This is just a reference. This doesn't define the culture. So this is, I want to bring this an important distinction here, that if someone thinks if the bodies of Zeus and Poseidon and the body of all the heroes of the human race intermingled, intermarried with the Olympians, somehow were naked in all their temples is because of the wide influence of homosexuality, then it's a misreading of history at best. Bottom line is, ancient Greece is a very different perspective. Then we have a new era, the transformation, and after the decadence of Roman Empire, where everything is now being in its very, very different desacralized manner. We can also find a lot of allusions in our own time, and these allusions have been made. They have been made for the past century, that there is a lot of the parallels we can draw in terms of this, what Roman Empire, or Roman world, right? The beliefs of the people represent, and it was a complete adaptation of the world of the Greeks, but with rapid and gradual deterioration of the sacred connection that existed for Greek people all the way up to the classical period, we could argue. Certainly for the archaic people of ancient Greece, the symbiotic relationship between the life of mortals and divines in that complete and utter flux of how one influencing the other and their interconnection and their utter dependence upon each other. Also, an interesting analogy to the Vedic culture, of which we will talk later on, more in relation to the mapping of the divine forces in their relationship to the human body and what it represents. One way or another, this process of desacralization in Rome reached its apogee until Rome collapsed from within, from without, and there is a new era rose, which one way or another, we could say, the body was reevaluated, and soon as the teachings of Christ began to be institutionalized and banked upon, right, when they were capitalized on, we could say that body has become a place of sin. The body per se, human body, was viewed as a place where Adam has fallen. Whether the Christian mystics and Christian theologians have tried to save the day is beside the point, because en masse, the understanding, the prevalent consensus was shared that there is nothing divine about the body. This body is a place of wretched affair. This is very important also to acknowledge, because the psychology of down to 7th generation, so to speak, if we, to borrow that analogy, has this importance that, and the psychologists, by the way, that those I've met and conversed with, even though they maybe speak from the platform of clinical or transpersonal psychology, they all share this perspective that at the genetic level, this information is encoded in us. Therefore, dismissing this like an outlived and no longer serving us paradigm is one thing, but the underbelly of what was reverberating, and perhaps generations of people living in shame, guilt, and some kind of mixed, at least in that way we can put it, sense of confusion, divided, dissected, polarized there and then, is something we still carry in our genes. Many of us do. And to deny that is to deny the fact that there are unacknowledged frequencies, unacknowledged shadow of that, what the shame, the guilt represents, still being very much part of that psychological makeup for many people, irrespective of whether they've been tapered with or not in their childhood. Something again, to put on a back burner, if you want to come back to, I'm all too happy. But let us move on. So that now we come to a place of, oh, by the way, the short window, of course, there was a beautiful window, Renaissance, yes, rediscovery of the glory of the antiquity. That's what the Renaissance was. Yes. Michelangelo's David would have never paraded the streets of Florence if not for that. Imagine suddenly in Italy, right? In the Catholic country, in the heart of the Catholicism, we have this sudden rise, sudden, complete, like beautiful waves of this renewal. And it was so profound and so shared that even the papal rule could not interfere with the overall sense of that renewal. Man has become the measure of all things, even if for a short while. That is, human figure again has become the measure. Because, by the way, one of the interesting things in antiquity, if any one of you ever took a crashed course in architecture, in the history of architecture, that is, when you would study the birth of classical orders, right? The classical orders that live all the way to the postmodernism, to our days. You know, you can find the echoes of the orders developed by ancient Greeks in the buildings of New York. You can find them everywhere, because that's how it works. There is this continuity of styles. No matter how one breaks away from the past, there will be a counter wave. That's what postmodernism is characterized, where we lament and filled with the sense of nostalgia, where we want to combine the modernity with how things used to be. So the Greeks came up with this order, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. But what was interesting is that every building, everything that was to be erected, built, need to be in proportion to the human body. The human body itself is being measured and looked upon as a perfect etalon, perfect template for all the laws of nature exemplified in all its proportions in terms of how all this sits together in the body in relation to the environment. This is why Greek temples are organic experience. They have nothing of the domination of the Gothic cathedrals, where you feel thwarted, where you feel overwhelmed, where you feel insignificant in that volume of space where every single line seems to be lifting and carrying up and up and up, and it's no end to that. I'm giving myself, of course, a bit of a, maybe that's not your experience, but next time you are in any of the larger Gothic cathedrals in any part of Europe, try to remember this and see how you feel compared to the temples of the Greeks. Even if you go to the largest of them all, the ruins of the Parthenon, there's something which is relatable to human experience, relatable to being in the body. So these ideas were revisited and rejoiced in and exalted in Renaissance. The Brunelleschi's cathedral and that unsolvable dome, which was eventually solved, that amazing Duomo in Florence, is a monument to that short phase, to that short breath of fresh air that European civilization breathed for a while. Way too short in my view, because soon after came Industrial Revolution, and the so-called Age of Enlightenment has nothing to do with enlightenment. It's has another term, the Age of Reason. So all this now being this shift from all this towards the domination and the rise of sciences. And with the rise of science and with the rise of the arrival of the Industrial Revolution, the body began to be viewed as the machine. This perfect machine. Perfect, imperfect, it's a machine. Everything is reduced to the set of laws. Universe is a machine. Universe became to be seen as this perfect mechanism, this Swiss watch of precise, we can determine and know whatever, everything because of the trajectory of the planets. And this gave, of course, tremendous sense of a rising confidence in the face of it all, because there was this euphoria built by centuries, culminating sometimes by the early 20th century, in all things possible. And the human body here is this machine, this machine, this Arnold Schwarzenegger, this bodybuilding. I'm just like giving you this, blitzkrieg of perspective of how all this body in Western culture undergone different views, different perspectives, and that now El Machina, right? This, next step of evolution from the point of view of Western idea of progress seems to be only natural to conclude that the next phase of human evolution is some kind of merger of human into or with digitized artificial intelligence. So, of course, this is highly polemical, not in my household, not here. I don't polemize much about that. I can see this as an inevitable trajectory and a bankruptcy of the human spirit and nothing more. Well, maybe some great enticement and excitement that the technology does provide. It provides a lot of this quick a sense of kind of connection that even now we're experiencing, now that we're using this. But in terms of seeing this as an ever-rising, ever-ascending arc in terms of evolutionary development is highly questionable. One way or another, to complete the picture of that, what and how the body undergone transformation in terms of understanding of the human body, I wanted to bring here also the impact of Eastern traditions during the years of counter-revolution, during the years of the culture revolutions of the 60s, the counter movement, where this kind of meditation revolution slogans, right, took many minds and hearts by storm. And we know that for many of you here, right, your parents already belonged to that era. Your parents already were part of that whole movement. And of course, I will use this as an umbrella not in any qualitative way, but what became to represent that new age. And the new age is upon us in terms of what it represents as that attempt at, again, merging these ideas, belief systems, spiritual methodologies of the Orient with the Western lifestyle, with the Western aspirations. Whether this is working or not, again, this is highly polemical, in some places also controversial, in some places also subject to tremendous misunderstanding of what the West represents in the current state of affairs and the ideas that are being borrowed very often from the East. So there are the pendulum moves between the more optimistic perspectives, that this is somehow, that's where the salvation comes from, to that which moves to a place of that this is just a мертвому припарка, as in Russian they say. It's like putting compress on a dead body. So, but truth is probably somewhere in between, somewhere in the middle. One way or another, I want to bring this into conversation, an important work, for example, that could be seen as that result of this interest of that new age, of the modern era, in this seminal work by Michael Murphy, who was, by the way, one of the co-founders of the Esalen Institute. I'm holding this volume in my hand, and it's nothing short of the Bible or Talmud in its weight and scope. It's hard to believe this book is 30 years old. The Future of the Body. Michael Murphy did an extraordinary job with the subtitle Explorations into the Further Evolution of Human Nature. There's no other book of the kind that I come across. But it's interesting because since the book was published in Los Angeles in 1993, it kind of almost was either came too early or too late. It's a rich repository of all the information that the author could lay his hands on up till that time. Yet it was just before the culminative studies of what took place in the Transcendental Meditation movement. I will speak about it in a moment. And yet it also coincided with the rise of the non-duality. So the whole body was thrown out with the bathtub, you see? So it's a kind of was almost a miss as an offering. Because very soon the Neo-Advaita of the so-called ambassadors and emissaries that came through their visits to India from the teachers that they sat with, who claimed the lineage to the Ramana Maharshi and the few principal figures of the time. You can narrow them down to 3 people. Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta Maharaj, maybe Krishna, Atmananda Krishna Menon, but he is much lesser known. But these other two gave rise to this whole wave of teachers. In India itself, Ramesh Balsekar, the Punjaji, known as Papaji, and then of course the teachers of that GEG lineage with full respect and love, coming to the Western shores, bringing this where body was no longer important. Don't worry about the body is going to perish. Body here is of no significance. And this is, of course, the great fallacy or great shortcoming of the Neo-Advaita and the non-duality, simply because certain slogans uttered by Ramana Maharshi, expositions, were taken at the face value, forgetting that Ramana Maharshi was rooted in the Adi Shankara's formulas. It was completely and utterly inseparable from the culture that he belongs to. So Ramana Maharshi would never deny the richness of the Indian philosophy, and his expositions, if one goes to, he was very well versed. But for different folks, different strokes, it's undoubtedly the sign also that the people who came to India cannot be blamed. The Western teachers cannot be blamed. They were part and parcel of the overall cultural way of relating, this intellectual imperialism or intellectual colonialism, give or take it, a term that I introduced some years ago, is something that we carry in our veins inadvertently without us being fully aware of that. Much more educated people, great scholars of our time, have spoken about it at length, have addressed these phenomena, how in modern democracy, right, in this currently shed platform of what the modern democratic society is characterized by, one of the key aspects of that is the primacy of an individual. And that individual here enjoys the right to consume any goods, consume anything that is available in the market. Market of spirituality is not exception. So therefore, the intricacies, nuances, and richness of the traditions often would feel somehow too cumbersome to bring in, were stripped in an attempt to give us this somehow a Greek temple, but actually where the order is only a facade. It no longer has anything to do with how building structure dependent upon physical codependence of what rests upon what. So the whole notion of dharma, that which means to support, was misplaced with a makeup, a quick fix, a so-called direct path. And we can go on and on and on without much insights into what human body actually is and what it represents. So it is from that perspective, I believe, that this is very important that we speak about it now. Very important that we redress this, what human body represents, and the teachings available through the traditions of Trika Shaivism are precisely afford this possibility because they are rich. They're considered to be the very, very culmination of everything best that came out of India.